Hey, my name's Paul. I am the education coordinator at Film Streams in Omaha, Nebraska. Let's talk about film. What are we doing here? Well, we're going to talk about the narratives that are frequently retold in film. I'm talking remakes, adaptions, reimaginings. Here's what I want to accomplish in this video. I want this video to demonstrate how we can think critically about remakes or adaptions. I want to ask questions or make connections that might help us gain further understanding and add meaning to narratives that just won't die. We're going to look at how context and the decisions that directors make can affect the story and even our understanding as viewers. Before we get started, let me just say how difficult it was to choose films that I wanted to talk about here. Hollywood borrows narratives and remakes films all the time. So what I had to do was I had to water down my choices, right? And what I did was I chose films that were adapted or remade from narratives that students in a typical American high school might study or be familiar with. Othello was originally written by William Shakespeare in the early 1600s. Othello is a play about a well-respected general in the Venetian army named Othello. It's also really important to note here that Othello is a black man in the very white society of Venice. There's also a guy named Iago in the play, and he is the worst. Iago hates Othello and creates this truly heinous plan to destroy him. Iago is also one of Othello's closest friends, which is super toxic. Iago and Othello might be considered foils of one another. A foil is a character who contrasts another character in order to highlight certain attributes. So Iago is outwardly genial and trustworthy, but inside he's a total monster. And Othello is often judged because of the color of his skin, but ultimately he's considered like noble or whatever. I won't go so far as to say that he's a good guy because ultimately he murders his wife, but people definitely let the color of his skin influence how they see him. I watched Othello, directed by Orson Welles, which is a more traditional telling of Othello, and I watched O, directed by Tim Blake Nelson, which is a more modern reimagining. Let's check out how O can enhance our understanding of Shakespeare's tragedy.
This year's unanimous choice for most valuable player, Mr. Odin James.
I love you.
I love you too. The plan I've come up with is flawless. We're gonna break him up.
O is set in a prep school in the early 2000s, which I think is a brilliant translation. In O, Othello, who is usually a respected war general, is converted into the popular basketball player Odin James. Odin, or O, is also the only black kid at his school, a school of mostly wealthy white kids. This translation offers a very contemporary understanding, especially for younger audiences, of who Othello is and how he's seen in his world. What I really want to talk about is Iago. Iago is one of Shakespeare's worst villains. He is total garbage. In O, Iago is named Hugo and he's the son of the basketball coach. Hugo is super frustrated that his dad and the whole school can't see how much of a treasure he is, and he hates O because O steals his spotlight. Iago, or Hugo, is a huge part of this narrative. He's honestly a bigger part of the narrative than Othello at times. And I think O facilitates the dynamics of this character in a really interesting way. I have two words: Josh Hartnett. Here's some context. In the late 90s, early 2000s, Josh Hartnett was considered a complete babe. Young Hollywood royalty, heartthrob, golden boy. If you were growing up around that time, you knew who Josh Hartnett was, period. Why am I talking about this? Well, because context is important. Casting Josh Hartnett as Hugo, Shakespeare's most hated villain, is an interesting choice that I think can add to our understanding of Othello's narrative. In Othello, most people trust Iago. They like him. They think he's a good guy. And that's exactly how he gets all of his evil plans accomplished. No one can see how truly twisted Iago is on the inside because he's friendly and charming. This is why I think casting Josh Hartnett adds a better understanding to the character of Iago. Viewers watching the film are watching an attractive character weasel his way into some awful, awful things. And because Josh Hartnett is such a heartthrob, viewers don't have to do much to understand that looks aren't indicative of a character's agency. Hugo might look pretty, but he is rotten. You might be thinking, Paul, that's a total stretch. And sure, that's fair. Maybe it is a stretch, but stretching is good for you. This is another example of how context can change and ultimately add meaning to an older narrative. Othello is a black man, and when Othello is translated into film or plays or operas, there is a history of casting white actors in blackface to play Othello. This happened in Orson Welles' version, which is one of Welles' crowning cinematic achievements. If we're talking about the context of the late 90s, early 2000s, the singularity of a black character in an all-white cast is not entirely uncommon. So watching a narrative like Othello reimagined in O probably didn't feel all that strange to audiences at that time. And to be fair, tokenism is kind of an important part of the narrative. In O, we actually have a black actor playing Othello. Could the director have chosen a white actor in blackface? Sure. Would that have been incredibly problematic? Yes, it was problematic when Orson Welles did it in the 50s, but that was a different time. My point is that context shifts, and narratives also need to shift along with them. Here's a thought experiment. What would a reimagining of Othello look like in 2030 or 2050, or in any social context that is increasingly diverse or inclusive? In 2050, does this narrative, which was originally written in the 1600s, lose its ability to be understood by viewers because the singularity of a black person in any space is outrageous? That's just some food for thought. Okay, so we're gonna jump forward in time about 200 years. Jane Austen just published Emma in the early 1800s, and the world will never be the same again. That's a little bit dramatic, but I don't care. Emma is about a wealthy young woman who is kind of, well, she's in everyone's business. Emma considers herself a very talented matchmaker and ends up creating some harmless trouble for everyone throughout the novel. She means well, though. Thematically, Emma is a narrative about young womanhood and young women's place in society. I watched Emma, directed by Autumn de Wilde, and Clueless, directed by Amy Heckerling. Let's start with Clueless. This is another example of a modern reimagining. Cher is the Emma character in Clueless, and Cher is a rich high school student living in Beverly Hills who has a very privileged life, and she knows it. It's immediately clear to viewers that Cher has a lot of wealth and access to things that make her life seemingly picture perfect. I think in order to understand this narrative, it's very important that viewers understand Cher or Emma. Emma and Cher are not universally liked. I think this character is often considered too vapid or spoiled or clueless by both viewers and people within the narrative itself. I think that this is an unfair and superficial understanding of this character, and I think this is where Clueless can add some understanding to the narrative of Jane Austen's Emma. Clueless was released in 1995, which was right in the middle of a surge in feminist thinking among young women. I'm talking girl power. A lot can be said about girl power or the feminisms that developed in the 1990s, but we don't have time to dig into that right now. What I want to point out is that girl power had a huge effect on the film industry and the types of films that were produced. Even to this day, girl power's effects are still prominent in the films that make their way to the theaters. Girl power in the 90s is often credited for the spectacular return of the teen movie. Studios, producers, directors realize that young women have money and they probably want to spend that money on things that represent themselves. What a concept. Clueless is a huge part of this legacy. Clueless is often considered as a catalyst for the resurrection of the teen film, especially teen films that focus on young womanhood or young women's place in society. So in the mid-90s, during the rise of girl power, a narrative about a charming young woman finding her place in life while making innocent and entertaining mistakes fits right in. This historical moment was a natural fit for a narrative like Emma or Clueless. Many young viewers related to Cher and Clueless in a big way, even if they all weren't rich Beverly Hills heiresses. Why? Because in Clueless, the viewer is almost constantly given access into Cher's head. And when it comes down to it, I don't think she's that much different than anyone else. She's just trying to figure it all out, help out her friends, and hopefully get her driver's license. Sure, Cher is super into beauty and fashion, and she cannot figure out how to stop at stop signs. And she has meltdowns when she can't find the perfect top to her outfit. But so what? People are allowed to be themselves, and Cher is most undoubtedly herself, no matter how much crap people give her. And that's the mentality that I think works within the girl power movement, and why a character and narrative like Austen's Emma works so well within the context of the mid-90s. But the 90s were like so long ago. What happens when we take this narrative into an even more contemporary context? Emma is a more traditional adaptation that was made in a hyper-contemporary context. Yep, I'm talking everyone's favorite year, 2020. We've already established that Emma is a character who is often misunderstood. And in Emma, we get to see her in the place where Jane Austen originally intended, old-timey times. But we're watching through a modern lens. To be honest, I really like this translation. I think it maintains what Clueless was trying to do and adds even more to it.
Mr. Martin, I have a confession to make. I have caused you great suffering, as I have also caused the suffering of my friend. My dearest friend.
Emma isn't just a meddling young woman. Sure, she meddles a lot, but I refuse to believe that anyone is as one-dimensional as that. We see in this clip that Emma is human and she messes up. And what's most impressive is that when she messes up, she tries to make things right. She messes up a lot in the film, actually. And each time she handles it. Sometimes more gracefully than others, but you know, that's life. Sometimes you're gonna fall flat on your ass. In the contemporary context, modern adaptations of Jane Austen's Emma really allow Emma her right of being a young person and being able to make mistakes and learn from them. Because we're watching these films when we are in 2020 and not in the 1800s, the ideas or expectations of what women can or cannot do or be has drastically changed. Sure, there are still people today who probably think Emma or Cher are just dumb, bored, rich girls, and that's fine. People are allowed to be wrong. Next up is Romeo and Juliet. It's the late 1500s and William Shakespeare is back at it again with another tragedy. This dude loves tragedies. Honestly, do you think he's okay? Should someone check on him? I'm sure you are at least somewhat familiar with Romeo and Juliet in some way. So there are these two families who hate each other. Why? Well, that's a great question. They don't really know why. Romeo and Juliet each belong to one of these feuding houses and they fall in love. Their love is obviously forbidden, but that doesn't matter because you can't stop true love. Then, in a true Shakespearean fashion, things don't go well for them. I had to watch Romeo and Juliet directed by Baz Luhrmann. And I also watched Romeo and Juliet directed by Carlei. Not super creative with these titles, but let's check them out.
I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it.
Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?
I do bite my thumb, sir!
Do you bite your thumb at us? Sir.
Is law of our side if I say aye?
No!
No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir!
Do you quarrel, sir? Quarrel, sir? No, sir!
So, right off the bat, you probably noticed that Luhrmann's adaptation of Romeo and Juliet is set in modern times, but uses Shakespearean dialogue. This adaptation has a special place in the hearts of many young people who were young-ish around the mid-90s. We've already talked about girl power and the film industry and how young women were an economic force around the time that this film premiered. And I think the leads, Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, are perfect visual representations of young love. It's totally believable that these two crazy kids would fall in love head over heels, even despite the fact that their families are mortal enemies. Beyond that, it is an outrageous film, and many people often disagree if it's good or bad or both. What it is a frantic mashup of Venice Beach, Hawaiian print, young Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, 90s gang culture, guns, teen angst, neon, everything, all mixed into a film that you just have to watch for yourself. I don't actually have a lot to say about this adaptation, besides that I think it's creative, visually appealing, and in various ways pretty true to Shakespeare's vision of a couple of kids who can't catch a break. What I did want to talk about is the 2013 remake. To be frank, this adaptation was a complete bust. It did not do well, both popularly or critically. Critics said that this version lacked passion and depth. The really interesting question I have is, why didn't this film do well with audiences? It's a fine movie. The costumes and the sets are well made, and there's some decent acting. Our leads are believably in love. Plus, the narrative of Romeo and Juliet has been around forever and remade a ton of times. Romeo and Juliet is obviously a winning story, right? So what's the deal? This should have been a slam dunk. What if the reason the 2013 film didn't do so well is because the traditional narrative of Romeo and Juliet can't survive in a contemporary space the way that it has in the past? I mean, the play's about rich white kids who fall in love and who can't be together because their families don't like each other. My point is that maybe we outgrow narratives, or at least a conventional understanding of narratives. We talked about this with Othello, which was another one of Shakespeare's happy and easygoing plays. Is it outrageous to think that certain narratives or even adaptations might lose their relativity in spaces that look drastically different from when they originated? There are some reports that Spike Lee is set to direct an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet set against a 1980s hip-hop landscape. This is interesting because this would potentially deviate from the narrative enough to feel new or modern while keeping some classical elements of the tragic tale of star-crossed lovers intact. This kind of adaptation breathes new life into something that might seem a little stale, which would hopefully then contribute to our understanding of Shakespeare's work and also Spike Lee's work. So keep your eyes out for that. Here is a clip with zero context. Enjoy.
She was trying to tell me something.
A recipe, perhaps?
Laugh as much as you choose, but you shall not laugh me out of my opinion. She posed no threat.
Okay, that's enough of that. You get the idea. These women are badass zombie killers who also wear beautiful gowns and junk. I hope you're thinking, zombies, really? And yes, really, zombies. So that clip is from Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which is a film adaptation from a novel by Seth Grahame-Smith, which is itself an adaptation from Pride and Prejudice by our girl Jane Austen. Now, don't quote me on this, but when Jane Austen sat down to write Pride and Prejudice, I don't think she had any idea that eventually zombies would infiltrate her iconic romance between Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Darcy. But I am so glad they did. Pride and Prejudice is about the Bennet sisters, who are all of marrying age. They come from a somewhat wealthy family, but their father is getting older and who knows how long he's going to be around. And unfortunately, due to English law, the Bennet sisters can't inherit his wealth because they're women. They all know that eventually they're going to need to marry in order to not starve to death. It's also like a love story too. Pride and Prejudice, like many of Austen's work, is about women's place in society, love, class, marriage, blah, blah, blah. You get it by now. I watched Pride and Prejudice, directed by Joe Wright, and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, directed by Burr Steers. Wright's Pride and Prejudice is a lovely film. It's honestly one of my favorites that I've talked about so far. There are dreamy English countrysides and good acting, great sets and costumes, fun, snappy dialogue. It's not over the top. It's a little over the top, but the right amount. All in all, it's a great watch if you're into historical romance, interesting characters, and smart writing. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about zombies. Not only zombies, but how zombies contribute to a greater understanding of Jane Austen's original narrative. One might look at Pride and Prejudice and think it's simply a film about rich young women who are obsessed with marriage and continuing, if not exceeding, their way of life. I do think that that's definitely part of the narrative for sure, and that's fine. But I think there's more to the Bennett sisters than that. This is why the addition of the zombies works. This is why I think that, in my opinion, why I think that the zombies work. It adds even more dimension to the Bennett sisters because, like all people, the Bennett sisters are complex. In Pride and Prejudice, their complexity might be super subtle to some viewers, but I think it's really, really hard to deny the complexity of a zombie slayer who also just happens to be interested in getting married and being a good sister and daughter. Like, I think that's next level complexity. This is obviously hyperbolic, right? Because young women do not need to be skilled assassins of The Walking Dead in order to be taken seriously. But I do think it helps add another layer, especially for viewers who don't share similar identities, perspectives, or experiences with the Bennett sisters. We saw the same thing with Emma and Clueless. Some people might think Emma and Cher are just dumb blondes, but they're not. The Bennett sisters might be interested in marriage, but so what? There are worse things in the world. A lot of themes within the films I watched and talked about were focused on women and class. And in Othello and O, we saw how race was used in certain narratives. And I think the reason why that these themes or narratives might work in today's world is because as a society, we still have a lot of work to do here, right? And we even saw how a narrative like Romeo and Juliet might lose its ability to survive in certain contexts because it doesn't do enough to maintain relativity. I just want to finish up by saying that this conversation obviously is not set in stone, right? There are plenty of English teachers in the world who I'm sure would completely disagree with a lot of the opinions and thoughts I brought up in this video, and that's fine. Again, my goal here was just to demonstrate how we might understand narratives of remakes better through film, even though the original narratives might have been written in like the 1500s or the 1800s, for example. I'm sure there are plenty of really great examples that you can pull from the films we talked about that I didn't even think of. And honestly, that's great. Keep doing that. That's super important to how we each understand and learn from film. Because you are a different person than I am, and you're going to understand and react to things differently than I do. To quote Shakespeare, you gotta do your own thing. Don't be just the same. Get the party jumping the way that you like. I'm kidding. That's the Cheetah Girls. Bye.